Farm for Profit Podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm for Profit Podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm for Profit Podcast.
Listeners, this is an interview that I am extremely excited to be a part of. And I say that about every guest, but this one just has a new feel for me because she's so new in the role that she's currently sitting in. I want to know how she got there, what the story is, how we get up to that point. Are you guys excited for this?
I'm very excited, and we should say that we're at Commodity Classic in this like super fancy private John Deere perch booth.
Upper deck. We are in the.
We're upper decking it.
We are heads above the rest. Wow, this is off to a great start. I feel like the air must be thinner up here.
Maybe.
And it's going to go to our heads.
Yep.
All right, let's get into this. Let's start off first with our guest introduction. So we have Jessie Scott with us. She has been a part of the successful farming team for more than 10 years, working across editorial, digital, and digital advertising. She is the 11th editor-in-chief, and we already had a conversation about what that even means before we got on the mic.
What is the in?
How do you get in?
I don't know.
With the editor-in-chief. But she is that of Successful Farming, which is a branch of Meredith, the oldest brand and the first woman to hold this position. Perfect timing because we're recording this a day after National Women's Day.
Yep.
Here at Commodity Classic. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is going to be a lot of fun just to get to know a little bit more about you. So I gave an introduction that was clearly written for me. How do you introduce yourself?
Probably not quite as eloquently as you did there. Especially like at this type of event, I always like to talk about my parents a little bit because they're farmers. So they farm in Marengo, Iowa, corn, soybeans, have a cow-calf operation. So that, as you guys probably know, at this type of show gives me some instant street cred. And then, the rest of my introduction, depending how many details you want, but I really didn't see myself going into agriculture initially. It was kind of what my parents did and my family did, and I wanted to go do my own thing. And agriculture was just sort of the profession in the industry that just kept calling me back to it and reeling me back in.
Iowa, what is it? 1 in 5 jobs is agriculture?
Yeah, it statistically is an astounding number.
So it was location. Geographically, you had to get
No, agriculture's great.
Yes.
You can fight it, but there's not much point in that, right? Yeah, just end up embracing it.
So you went to school for something else, or what'd you go to school for?
Yeah,
formally?
So in hindsight, I could have very easily have gone to Iowa State. I could have done sort of a communications ag combination major. I went to Drake, which has an amazing magazine program. I didn't do that. That would have been really smart, too. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I majored in public relations because I loved reading, I loved writing, I liked storytelling, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I was like, PR is sort of a broad, you could do a lot of different things with that. So that's what I ended up doing. In hindsight, maybe I could have chosen a little bit more of a direct path, but it's worked out all right for me, so no complaints.
Yeah, everybody looks back and thinks they can take more of a direct path.
Yeah.
As far as that goes. Listeners, I know this is a little off our normal structure for a profit show. We want to just let you know that there is a goal. We do have a targeted outcome from this episode, but we want to get to know Jessie a little bit differently than we do our typical experts on topics, just because of the engagement that she has with the company she works with and the path that she has taken to get there. So just stick with us. We're going to get you a lot of value out of this show, but we also want to hear more about her story. So you said your family farms around Marengo. What's that farm look like?
Well, I won't give too many of the specific details because my father would probably not be too happy with me when I share acreage and some
you don't have
of
to do
the
that.
numbers, as you guys probably know. I've loved that about this job because we do ask farmers, how many acres do you have, how many head of cattle, and some of them are very forthcoming about that, and others are like, I didn't ask you how much money you made, and I was like, it's a very different thing. But so my dad farms. My mom is very involved in the operation too, a little bit more on the cattle side and bookkeeping, kind of keeping everything going there. My dad farms with my uncle. George, and then George's son Alex is also involved in the operation, and they've got a few hired hands. So
you have row crops, it sounds like.
Yep,
and
corn, soybeans.
And a little bit of livestock as well, did I hear?
Cow-calf.
Okay,
Yep.
cow-calf as well.
Yep, so they are just gearing up, calving starting,
Yep.
so it's a busy time back home.
It's snowing pretty good right now. Back
It is
home.
snowing pretty good, too, I
Which
know.
that is typical of calving season.
We are in
Yes.
Florida, though, and it's like,
Like
80
85 degrees, humid. Yep.
Great place to interview you, just
Yes,
saying.
yeah.
So, so were you like the farm kid, chore buckets, boots, the whole works, out feeding cattle, horse girl? Like what's
So-
or you just write about it?
I like to explain it as, and I wrote about this. I've been in the job for almost exactly a week. It was announced last Wednesday, but my first editor's column was due I submitted it on Monday. So I wrote about this in my first column, but there are a lot of farm kids that they love the farm, they love agriculture. They're like, this is what I've always wanted to do. Kind of already said I didn't have that same pull, and a big reason for that was I was a huge nerd, bookworm. My mom used to threaten to take my books away to get me to clean my room.
Corey, have you ever heard that come out of your mom's mouth?
No, I haven't.
Corey, I'm going to take your books away.
So very atypical in that way.
Okay.
And so that was I loved school, was really good at it. So that was my skill set. And then you compare that to my dad, who is, got my bachelor's degree, got my master's, mainly because I love school. My dad did half a semester at a community college and was like, I don't need this, and hasn't needed it to run a successful operation. We just have very different skill sets. He is very good at all of the equipment and can operate pretty much anything under the sun. And my cousin is very much the same way. So growing up, it was a lot of how does my skill set fit into what my parents do? And at the time, I couldn't see that. I think that was why I hadn't really pictured agriculture as where I wanted to be, because I didn't know how those two things would line up. So I did some of the chores and things, but I wasn't as drawn to that, in the same way that my cousin was. He has always known that he wanted to farm,
Right.
and could name every single piece of equipment on the farm from the time he was 5. Those were probably some
Yeah.
of his first words. So my experience was a little bit different.
I think just growing up on the farm, even if you're not involved in it, I've heard a lot of companies say that that you're still a farm kid, you still see it, you still know how it's going. They want to hire you because you got a different set of work ethic than someone that didn't grow up on the farm.
And it, I think, also keeps me honest too. I can be stressed about my work life, which is a very corporate work life, and then I'll call my dad. A couple weeks ago, they had 2 sets of twins that came really early. They lost both of them. Just that sort of perspective of having a lot of meetings is really not all that stressful in the scheme of things, and also keeping me honest about what are the topics that we're covering. Are those actually relevant to what farmers need to know? Are there things we're not covering that we should be? So there's some good, honest feedback that comes from that too.
Right. So our listeners are going to be more familiar with the Successful Farming brand than they are of the corporate -- Meredith, which is where did that come from? -- Are we trying to spell out a period and a slash?
Well, we always knew it as local as Meredith, but then something happened, right?
Yep. So the company started, you mentioned this at the beginning, but originally in 1902 with Successful Farming. So Meredith launched out of Successful Farming and built up other brands like Better Homes and Gardens. It's probably one of the biggest. So that was Meredith for a very long time. 3 or 4 years ago, COVID time has kind of made it hard to keep track of years, but Meredith acquired Time Inc. So Time Inc. had a lot of publications, much
That's
more
Time
consumer
Magazine?
facing.
Time Magazine?
Yeah, so we owned Time for a very short period of time, and we sold that off.
Yeah.
We also owned Sports Illustrated and a couple other big brands.
Wow.
But People was the big one, and one of the main reasons we made that acquisition. Southern Living, other things that really fit into the consumer side of that portfolio. So the company expanded a lot after that acquisition, but we were still known as Meredith. And then come about a year ago, I think we're maybe a year and 3 months into the next acquisition, purchased Meredith. So the name they came up with is Meredith, which is a little bit of a mouthful. Sometimes I still revert to Meredith or just call it
Yep.
is a part of IAC. IAC is big parent company. They're really known for digital transformations, so they don't own anymore, but they launched Expedia and sold that off. They've done a lot around online dating, so like Match Group was part of that. They own Angie's Group or Angie's List.
Oh, wow.
So Dotdash, the division before we were a part of that, sprung out of About.com, which if you remember was a website you could go to and it had almost every topic under the sun that you could want to know things about. It no longer exists. They took all of that content and spun it off into its own separate brands, but a very like digital first focused company, and that's who acquired us.
You have lots of different genres, but your genre specifically is just successful farming, correct?
Correct.
I was going to
yes.
say, because we don't think People's Magazine as much in Des Moines, Iowa.
Nope.
And that's where you're at, correct? Des Moines?
Yes. So headquarters up until we were purchased by Dotdash were in Des Moines. Once we were purchased by Dotdash, their headquarters were in New York. Our largest office was actually in New York after the
gotcha.
Time acquisition. That's where I think all of the people staff are.
Guys, I think having all those different brands, though, we're here at Commodity Classic, and we just interviewed some other John Deere guys, and we talked the future, and we talked digital, we talked data, and now a big part of your job, Jessie, is digital advertising. When we think of all those different brands and subsets that Dotdash has, mercy, think of the data. It's like that's where my mind's going. It's like the data to what does the consumer want, and then how does that relate to farming?
Think of the people.
Oh, mercy.
Yeah, so we have a very large consumer database. If you think about like all of the subscriptions we have across all of the brands and all of the data points we have on all of those subscribers, we have a very large database. Now, a lot of those obviously are more consumer focused, but because of that, with our farming audience, we also know if they're subscribing to other brands, other topics that they might be interested in.
I think it's really smart to be over those other genres because it brings validity because they're not just tunnel vision in ag.
Yeah.
Right? They see trends before it gets to ag and all that kind of stuff. It makes you real.
And there's a lot of expertise there too in terms of digital advertising was the last role I had. So, getting out to New York, meeting with the people that are coming up with those solutions and the systems and processes. But also people that are really keeping a trend or an eye on trends in the digital space. So there's one of the guys that we work with, his name is Tim Fisher, very tech-focused guy. So he's leading up an internal initiative looking at ChatGPT, so really how AI can be used in journalism. I didn't even know you had that note written down.
It was on my question board to ask you.
Be.
So I'm using ChatGPT, and I was just waiting to tee that up. Yeah.
So, and I haven't had a chance. He was in town last week. He's based in Colorado, and we were talking about other things. But so he's leading up an internal initiative to see not necessarily how we can use it to create content, but how can we use it to improve some of our processes and become a little bit more efficient too. So there's that type of thing.
I wondered, as a writer, you said you geeked out in school, and as a writer editor, and if I dive into this for a second, for listeners, ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, to help us write content. I'm a horrible speller, and I have no grammar or structure when it comes to writing. So I love ChatGPT to go out and help me explain what I want to the customer. But as a writer, I got to think, it's like, you're taking my job, you son of a buck. What's your opinion on that? What do you think?
So I had a question from a PR rep earlier this week working on an article about what all of this means for ag journalism. And I'm like, I think a lot of people have fear, like that technology is going to come in, it's going to replace jobs, we're going to need less writers. But the truth is, the technology right now, as it exists, there's still flaws, there's still inaccuracies. Like, AI can't go out and call somebody and get a quote or, really tell the story in that way, and that's a lot of what our storytelling is. But I was just playing around with this. I plugged one of our articles in, and I asked it to spit out a few titles. And it can do that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I may not want to use the exact title that it gave me, but it does help be okay, those are some different variations that I might not have thought of. The title's too long, you could tell it to make a shorter one. There's just some of those things that how can we be a little bit smarter about this? And we're still going to be doing the writing. We're not going to turn that over to AI anytime soon, but how can we be a little bit better at what we do?
So, I wrote an article on the 2023 Farm Bill yesterday.
You.
I, in air quotes, listeners, and I'm pretty sure it went to Successful Farming's website and took a bunch of parts and pieces.
So will that be copyright?
But regurgitated it in a total organic fashion.
It might be more plagiarizing than
Plagiarism,
straight
okay.
up copyright. I don't
Yeah.
know how it quotes all of those sources, or if it's rewriting it enough that it's not technically plagiarism.
And
Yeah.
Dave just handed her his business cards. Now she's going to go to WhitakerMarketingGroup.com and she's going to
Let's
send
go
him
read this article.
a red letter that says stop.
But what you're using it is more for like SEO and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, just to get
So
words.
I'm strategically want to get in front of Google, so I want Google to see, just like I would track backlink to Successful Farming. Google loves to see that, hey, this very reputable source thinks that you're good too. So that's why I love being a content creator. If we create content and Successful Farming loves it, well, then Google says, hey, this huge brand over here loves you. Hey, that guy's good.
Yeah.
So that's what I want it for. I want it to track back to me, but I'm more digital
Right.
side of that world.
So the focus of this episode when we get to it is going to be about how you go about planning content, managing people, getting people to meet deadlines, and ultimately setting goals for you and your team. So when we get to that point, that's what we're going to help send our listeners away with, is a little nugget to maybe better their farm or their business. But how did you get to the role that you're in now? What steps did you take?
So it was a little bit of a roundabout journey. I started as the innovations editor, so covering new equipment, so coming to events like this and talking to Deere to see what new products they had. And I did that for 3 or 4 years at the start.
So what's an editor do?
That's an excellent question.
Is that like what my mom did to my college essays, where she'd take the red pen and cut it off and tell me I spelled it wrong?
So we use editor in a lot of our titles, but really if you think more like reporter or journalist, because at that point in my career was not editing anyone else's content.
See, I was thinking you're out. Yeah.
Yep. So you're going out, you're interviewing, you're covering new products, you're going to farms, you're hearing farmers' stories, and for the most part, you're writing about it. I also got coerced into doing some video work, so part of the Successful Farming TV show on RFD, so I did some of that. So you're setting up interviews, going to farms, some of that was covering new products too. So you're more of the reporter, I think, is a little bit more straightforward.
new
The title
titles.
can be a little confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Editor Hillebo over here.
Yeah.
Editor.
Editor-in-chief.
Editor.
Yeah.
Editor.
I was waiting for it. I wasn't going to give it
Yes.
to myself.
Or chief editor, you
Yeah.
can call it whatever you want. So I started covering new products, but really was drawn to the digital side. So just started to learn more about our website, our CMS, our content management system, how we posted articles to agriculture.com, and just really fell in love with that side of it and kept doing more and more. And eventually a position opened up to oversee agriculture.com. So I like to think about that a couple of different ways, but part of that is what content do we need to put up? So what is the news that farmers need to know today? And then also thinking about all of the different ways online that you find content. So if you're searching for it, if you're subscribing to a newsletter, if you're on social, so really coordinating all of those things. So
And how that world has changed so much to where you guys have a magazine, but I got to assume that shift and trend has trended far, far to the digital landscape.
Well, and I like to think about it too. We know farmers still love print. Every time we do research on it, they still say they love it and they want it. And we have a great vehicle and system established. You get the magazine, you get the content, but online is so much more complex in terms of you find content so many different ways, and there's
Right.
so many different types of content. And you mentioned SEO, that was one of the things when I started in that job, really getting our editorial team to think about, you can't title content online the same way that you do in print. And not just because it's not going to get any traffic, but if you're putting all of this energy into creating an article, you want farmers to be able to find it and read it and to be meaningful, so helping make that transition. But yes, we have had a big shift, and if you've the way our editorial team is structured too, we have a lot more editors now that are focused first on digital and print a little bit more as an afterthought. And when I started, it was completely the other way. Almost everybody was focused on print first and then would contribute digitally as you had time.
So is that how Successful Farming has maintained just the leadership in the industry? I mean, I think, as print was dying and companies dying, you guys have this forward focus. You're always looking for the next thing. Is that how you're staying afloat?
Well, I hope we're staying afloat a few different ways.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, I think there is you can't just keep doing the same thing. So we still have a print product. We've had a print product for a long time. Our publisher really likes to say, like, that's one of the most expensive products we have. If farmers aren't reading it, we're not going to keep sending it to them. But we know from our readership studies that they are still reading it, and that print's really important. But also, what else do they want? What is the news that they want today? They want it on a site that's fast, that's easy to read. They have a good user experience. They want podcasts.
Yeah.
They want audio content. They want video. So making sure that our content keeps evolving to how farmers are consuming it.
Is that trending the same through like Better Homes and Garden and all that? They still want the print and all that?
Yes.
Or is ag skewed?
I would say there's a little bit of both. So when you think about our average audience, right, like it's the average farmer, the 58, like they tend to skew a little bit older, so they're a little bit more tied into print. But even when we've done our readership studies, that younger audience still wants print. And it's not that they're not using print and doing more online, they're just consuming more media overall. And I think, particularly when you're getting started farming, like you're just trying to learn and consume as much as you can. On the consumer side, they've looked more at most of our consumer publications. They're not news. So like this is not the news you need of the day, really, besides people. But if you look at a Better Homes and Gardens, it's kind of a luxury, right? Like you want that beautiful cover. You want it to be a little bit thicker. They've upgraded the size. You want to feel it. You want the quality paper. Like it's almost like a coffee book. Like you put it out on display. So more of that like luxury, like lean back experience to like really dive into that content. So it's still important. It's just kind of pairing up what the audience wants and if that makes sense for that brand.
Yeah, instead of a quarter for a newspaper that everybody got as they walked down the street or went into Casey's, it's a completely different. Dave, you've talked about this even with your auction flyers and the booklets that you make when you're going to sell a farm. That's another way to differentiate your business.
Yes.
Is the feel. Who'd have thought that mattered? It's really hard to control the feel on a podcast, but we hear from a lot of our listeners that it's great that it feels like a conversation.
And how many business cards have you guys got this week that are soft touch or have copper foil or have embossment on them now?
Right.
It's how do you set yourself apart, or UV overlays, or whatever. Rounded
are
corners.
You calling out your own business
No,
cards?
I am not. I am not. It just happened to. No, it's just
Humble brag.
How many? But or thicker. But it makes you remember. It's memorable.
Right.
Like, hey, that
I still remember when that was when the new business cards came out and people were trying to be different. And you got those ones that were square.
Yep.
That was the worst idea ever.
It's
I
the
get
wrong
those.
size.
It didn't go anywhere. It didn't fit in any slot in your wallet. It didn't. Yeah, it always just frustrated.
I like the metal ones. There's metal ones now but then you can't
That's an
write.
investment.
Yeah.
I like the dot
card.
just to be able to electronically pass that on. Well, we're getting off topic.
So you went to digital editor, and now you're a master in chief on top of that. Okay, so you went up another.
Please don't call me that.
She's gonna go back and have a
So-
whole new title.
you went up another level, and I have a few of your accomplishments here. How much did some of your Horizon Awards or journalism awards thrust you into that position? Is that something you wanted? The top dog, if you will.
I'm gonna give a little bit more background because I did kind of cut off my last answer. I'm realizing now as you're bringing us back, and then I will hopefully get to answering that. So, after I moved into more of the digital editor managing type role, I took a little bit of a veer off of what I was doing on the editorial side to move over to digital advertising and overseeing our website development. So that's more of a sales and marketing role. It's not on the editorial team. So that for me was like my boss came to me and he's like, we need somebody in this role. We think you'd be really great at it. But it wasn't something I had planned on doing. It wasn't something I had a lot of knowledge in. So it was very much like learning an entirely new world and new acronyms and really digging into what is digital advertising and data and all of the things that come along with it. So that was a really great opportunity to build my skill set, but I knew long term that I wanted to come back to the editorial side, and it was probably when I was in the digital content role, like I started to, like, that was when the editor-in-chief role, like that was my that was my goal, or that was really what I was working toward. Whether or not it was going to happen, I didn't know that, but that's what I started to work toward at that point. I would say in terms of some of the like awards and things, some of that was just nice recognition, like some of the writer awards. Like when I first started writing, I didn't have a lot of confidence in it, so sometimes that recognition is just a nice little like pat on the back. People who've been in the industry forever and have thousands of those might not mean quite as much anymore, but at the beginning of my career, that really like helped me have some confidence in my skills. For some of those other awards, like the IFAJ one and the Andy Marquardt one, that enabled me to go to the International Federation of Ag Journalists as a conference every year. It's in a different country, so you get to go and meet with journalists from all around the world. And they do a boot camp at the beginning that is 10 young journalists, and it's 10 journalists from developing countries. So you get together for a couple of days and share your experiences and develop skills. So that was the best thing about those, is it enabled me to participate that in a couple of times, and I've gotten a lot out of that experience.
That's all kinds of perspective. I mean, that's probably a huge eye-opening experience, and I can see why that would be valuable.
Maybe we can get Successful Farming to make a podcast award, and then we could feel accomplished as well. Just kidding.
Careful what you look. We might be at the bottom of that.
We might be. Well, jeez.
She's going to create the award, and it's going to go to somebody else. That's pretty good. Okay, so now...
Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. So now you are editor-in-chief, which we've been giving you flack about ever since you sat down, because we don't understand the title. And our listeners probably themselves also don't. They know that it's obviously a big position, but what is that? What does that job do?
And it's been 1 week? Is that right?
It's been 1 week.
All right, so in the first week, what does that job do?
It's been 1 week, and I left yesterday to get here, so I have had like 5 days in the office since the announcement. But in general, the editor-in-chief is responsible for all of the content creation for Successful Farming across all of our platforms. So overseeing all of that. Doesn't mean I do all of that. We've got a really great team that manages some of the digital, manages newsletters, that comes in to help with some of those. But really making sure, let's take the print side, for example, that the schedule we have lined up, the articles we're producing are really what farmers need to know. So some of that is making sure we're covering the production aspects, making sure we're covering the business of farming, very much in relation to like what you guys talk about on your podcast. We know farming is more than a business, it's a lifestyle, but you do have to treat it like a business if you want to be profitable and keep farming.
Yes.
But also, recognizing that it is a lifestyle and there's a lot more that comes along with it. So what does your family need to know? Covering topics like mental health. Right. So really like treating it as both the business and the individual, the farmer. So overseeing how all of that content comes together. So that's kind of high level, but more specifically,
it's a pretty big, all-encompassing role.
It is, and I've done a lot on the digital side. So that area and that aspect is very comfortable. I get that. I know how most of that works. I've been working really closely with Natalina on our team, so she's taking over that aspect as I move into this role. But a lot on the print side is brand new for me. So going through, right now we're putting the April magazine together. So going through all of the stories that are slated for that, going through the book makeup. So where are all of those stories running? What advertising are they running next to? Do we need to cut some pages? Do I need to give some feedback to the designer, to the editor? So making sure that all of that comes together so we have a really great product for farmers at the end of the day. Being
new in that position, I'm assuming you knew who your predecessor was that was in that position. Do you as I think of multi-generational farming, I'm watching the screen here and looking at multi-generation farming. So we get to interview some kids that maybe want to change things that their dad didn't do as farming evolves. Is there that in the magazine? You know what your predecessor did, but now do you have
different
visions for the future of what you might like to, maybe not tomorrow, not 1 weekend, but 2 or 3 years down the road of some things you'd like to see the direction go?
So short answer, yes. I think long answer, I do have the advantage that I've been with the brand for a while. I've seen different aspects of it. So I I know what we do. I know what we do really well. I think I'm pretty in tune with what our audience needs. But I'm also very much a person that some people come in and they're just like, they're very decisive, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And even if they may be totally wrong, like you just believe them on it, right? Because they're so confident. Yep. I'm a little bit more of, and I'm particularly on the print side as I'm learning things, I want to learn what we're doing, why we're doing it that way, and then start to ask, okay, like, well, have we considered doing this or have we considered doing that? So trying to get a good understanding for where we are today first, asking questions. One thing I would love to do, hopefully this summer, is to get out and talk to farmers and see how they consume media and get some. I mean, we do studies, so we have all of this like quantitative research, but to really get some good qualitative. Here's what farmers need. Here's how we need to continue to evolve. Yeah. I think in general, making sure we have that good balance of content. So the business, the production, more of the family lifestyle, like a good mix of all of that and all of those topics that are important to farmers. But then how do we evolve in that storytelling? So a lot of that is, the print is one portion, but how do we evolve what we do online? How do we bring stories to life more through video, on social? How do we keep advancing in those ways?
It's like diversifying your farm. Mm-hmm. It's just making sure that the brand stays diversified and you can be ready to take advantage of what technology comes down the pipeline next without it being new and scary.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're well into this episode, and we haven't addressed the topic yet. But we've gotten a really good perspective on who Jessie is, and that's what we wanted. Yep. Because the next phase of this episode is going to be the value add to the listeners, because you just mentioned it. You're working now with an entire, not just now, you have been working with an entire team of people. And you have to convince them to buy into the direction that either the company had been going, has plans to go, or a new idea that you've got coming up with. And we get a lot of emails from our listeners that run farms that struggle with motivating their employees. One, finding help. But two, finding good help. And then three, finding help that wants to go above and beyond for something that they don't have any ownership in. So kind of going to go down that direction. And the topics of planning, goal setting, motivating others, how do we get and encourage others to meet deadlines? So starting off first with you, what steps have you taken personally? Because you checked the mark, you circled editor-in-chief early on as a position you wanted to get. So how did you set goals to get to where you are?
I wish it was maybe quite that strategic. I think there was a lot that appealed to me about that position because I really enjoy the strategy. I really enjoy the vision, not necessarily the very tactical, I don't have to be the one writing the article. I love giving feedback or collaborating and brainstorming. So there were a lot of things about that position that really appealed to me. So I think what I tried to do was take on new roles and learn that skill set that would help prepare me for that. So moving into the digital advertising role, did that necessarily help me from an editorial standpoint? No, but it did help me learn more about the business.
Now, you said earlier, though, that it did help you make the decision that you knew where the goal was, and it was going to be editor-in-chief. So you realized that you wanted to get back to journalism just a touch more. So even negatives can be positives if used correctly.
And I think, particularly on the editorial side, we have a pretty, firm line between the sales team and the editorial team. But in this role in particular, there's the recognition that, yes, our editorial content needs to be separate from what the sales team does. But if we want to be a business and we want to remain a business and we want to be available to farmers, we also have to make money, right? So understanding the business side of it, I thought would really help prepare me for this role as well. So it was trying to seek out those type of things, learning more about the business side, even though I wasn't as drawn to that as I was to the editorial side, that I think helped. But also part of it for me was going back to school to get my master's. I felt like I had a really good skill set and foundation from school the first round, but a lot of that work is tactical, right? It's here's how you get a job. So we're going to teach you how to write an article, how to write a press release.
Right.
But how does it come to managing people and leadership skills and change management and all of these things that are really important as you're managing, as you're developing a vision and helping people get that? So I went and sought that out that way.
It's so hard to to think about developing a plan for yourself. And for our listeners to develop a plan for your farm. Corey, you for the farm, you're working on a structured plan right now for some upgrades.
Yep.
Some grain handling facilities, some equipment upgrades.
Yep.
And you've probably put more effort into that plan in the last 6 months than you probably would say the farm's ever done.
Yeah. And it's not second nature for us, so it's draining. So like to hear people talk about that, how they do it, it's good.
But how much research did you put in to making sure you were doing it right?
A lot.
You asked other people.
Yeah,
I saw you on Twitter
Yep.
posting out there. I think you're going to make that big of a commitment. You're going to research that just to
Yeah,
touch.
I want to know everyone's experiences. I want to know what other companies have to offer. I want to make the best decision because that's a lot of money that we're spending.
And when we reflect on the podcast itself, it's so hard, and I'm saying this in a true, honest fashion, to set goals for ourselves because we never saw ourselves in the position we're in today. And so you set a goal and you obtain it. You have to remind yourself that it's okay to set a new one and make it a bigger one. The same thing when you're encouraging the people you're working with. I'm sure you're working on the same thing with some of your younger editors or inexperienced of shoot for one of these awards. But then after you get there,
What comes next?
What do we do next?
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's just the encouragement too, because there are a few of those that encouraging people to apply for those, letting them know that, sometimes it's just that confidence, like knowing that you should be applying
You're
for
in
that.
this category.
Yes, yeah, like you are worthy of this, whether or not you get it this year or not, or in 5 years, but just sometimes people need that recognition and that push too.
And when you think about the path that you've taken to get here, obviously you've mentioned that it wasn't 100% smooth. It wasn't solid upwards trajectory. What are some things that you could share with our listeners that maybe would help provide some confidence or some reassurance when things aren't going well?
That's a tough one.
Go to Australia on a trip.
I did study abroad there. Yes, that helped. I think there's some of the, taking a step back and thinking about where you want to go. And like I said, like this was my goal. It was my dream job. But I also recognize that it's a job that doesn't become available very often. And it was going to be a matter of when it came available, where I was at in my career, where our staff was at, the type of leader that they needed. So the goal I had really set was for me to learn more about strategy and leadership and editorial and to build my skill set. And if that ended up taking me to that goal, that's great. Maybe it was going to take me somewhere else. So I think focusing on the, what can you do to build that skill set, set some goals, check in on them, make them attainable, build new ones once you've gotten there, and also give yourself a little bit of grace too, right? Like life happens, things come up, things that may be totally out of your control. So to not be too hard on yourselves in those moments either.
I loved what you said early on about the perspective that your family farm provides and the perspective you got when you attended that conference with editors from all around the world. That you might think you're having a bad day and you call your dad and you find out that he's having a bad day. And maybe it's okay to have bad days together. Same thing, you get perspective is maybe you're in a more fortunate position than somebody else doing the exact same role that you are in a completely different part of the country. Love's a strong word, but the perspective that I've gained in the Uber trips that I've taken here in Orlando.
Yep.
And I just love asking the drivers where they're from, what they did before this. The ride that I had getting to the conference center yesterday was a gentleman from Venezuela. And he talked about the 23-year dictatorship that their leadership has had and how poisoned that is in their culture. And it just, boom, put me in a spot going, Dad, you know what? Whether we like them or not, every 4 years we have the opportunity to change our leadership structure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just fascinating to maybe check yourself.
And I think for our team in particular, too, really for the editors as well, but, there's something about when I was interviewing farmers more regularly, now I get a lot of this from my dad and coming to shows like this, but interview a farmer, go out with them, talk to them. It is a really good perspective on, you get out of your head and all of the things that you need to be doing and you remember what's actually important. Yeah. And to your point about the journalists from other countries, there are journalists from different parts of Africa where they don't have freedom of the press completely, so there are some safety concerns. Journalists get jailed. There are a whole host of issues that they have, things that we take completely for granted. And we're all trying to cover the same thing and give farmers the resources they need, but that looks very different. So it is a very humbling experience. And a lot of those conversations, you're talking about best practices and what you need to do, but there is always that moment of, like, what are you actually able to do where you are? Like, you have to, some people have to think about their safety in that standpoint and the way that they're covering topics too. So it's a humbling experience as well.
Yeah. I want to ask about building your team around you, because and I'm going to tie it back to farms, because when I see successful farms that have employees and all that, they kind of they delegate well, right? They're the editor-in-chief of their farm. They're the CEO of their farm, right? You're only a week into this, but are you already finding yourself that you're delegating more, or are you still trying to get your hands on stuff?
It's a little bit of both. I would say, like, my personality, I tend to be a little bit more of a fixer. Like, if something's like there's an error in something or somebody made a mistake, I just want to go in and fix it. And I've really tried to teach myself to be more of the teacher, so that I don't need to be the one going in and changing those things all the time. Like, help people do it right the first way and pass along that skill set. So it's a little bit of both in my current. There are things where I'm like, yes, this needs to get handed off. Lori Bedord, who's been on our editorial team for years, we met Tuesday before the announcement, and I was like, all right, like, I'm going to need some help with things until I get certain things handed off. So we talked about, going through April copy, for example, and splitting up some of those assignments. So recognizing when you need help, recognizing when to delegate. I think my learning style, I'm very visual, and like sometimes it helps for me to get a little into the weeds to just understand how things work. So trying to get enough of that visibility that I feel like I can do my job, but also not trying to overstep or be a micromanager. I'm like, I don't need to be involved in everything, but it does help me to learn if I can see more of the details.
There's a lot. We've gotten feedback from our listeners that say all the time that they don't want any of their employees to feel like they're being asked to do a job that the owner of the farm wouldn't do either. And that kind of helps when you can put your hands on something. It doesn't have to be doing that job every single day, but stepping in and getting a refresher. My wife likes doing this in her role, to where they get a lot of feedback in their email inbox that is handled and responded to by other staff members. Some afternoons she likes to dive into the inbox, give somebody some time to go do a project, whatever it is, and get right back at it. Same thing on a farm. Mm-hmm. It might even just be changing the oil. But we contradict what we just said, because we pitch all the time, don't do the $15 an hour job, the $20 an hour job when you have $100 an hour job to do it. No. Yeah. But there's a balance.
Some of the best CEOs out there have sat with the customers, like Starbucks. So Starbucks went out and said, what could we have done better to get your coffee better? And look at their brand that they have, because he related with, he didn't lose sight of the bottom when he went to the top.
Yeah. Okay, the payoff question that I was most excited to ask, and you guys have been watching me kind of like spinning my chair. I've been waiting to get to this.
There's a lot of pressure for this, all right.
Well, it's a pain point. There for a while on our podcast, we'd go on rants about stuff that frustrated us to relate to our listeners. And one of the frustrations I have is reliability of what others say they're going to do and when they're going to accomplish it. Corey, your farm, our listeners' farms, you don't make the fertilizer.
Mm-mm.
You might grow some of the hybrids, but you don't grow every hybrid that you plant.
No.
You're not writing the scripts for your farm. There's so many things that farmers rely on somebody else to do. How do you motivate somebody to hit your deadline and not be frustrated? Okay, we've talked on this podcast a lot. Set clear expectations, open communication. But how's it really work?
So I will say editors are notoriously bad at meeting deadlines. So just full disclosure on that.
But there's always a magazine.
Now you're the chief at it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well,
but there's always a magazine. There's
always a magazine, yes. And we have a production manager, Diana, who is amazing at communicating about the deadlines, giving reminders, like to the entire editorial staff or to individuals when they need them. So I'd say that is part of it, the reminders of this is when this is due, this is when it needs to go to design, all of those type of things. But I think best practice, now whether or not we always succeed in doing this, communicating about why that deadline exists and why it's important. So not just an arbitrary, like, I need this end of next week when I'm not going to have time to get to it for 3 weeks.
Right.
Because that's not helpful. And then in the back of someone's head, they're like, well, did that really need to be done then? Was there a reason for that deadline? So I think as much as you can, communicating about why this needs to be done then, sending reminders. And then I think there's a little bit of the, trusting the people that you work with to do their job and to get it done. And maybe if that trust has been broken, maybe it's time to find somebody else that's going to be a little bit more accountable to that too.
You happy with that?
Does it help you?
You're not answering anymore.
No, I'm not. Did you
You
see
were
how
so excited.
Did you see how? But as she answered, did you see how relaxed I got? And I
Yeah.
sat my shoulders
Yeah.
back in the chair. I mean, it is something that bothers me, and I never thought it would when we started a podcast. That you rely on so many other people.
I think part of it too sometimes, and this is maybe a little bit more of an editorial one, but if somebody's not meeting a deadline, like sitting down and asking, like, what's the issue there? Do you have way too many other things on your plate, and do I need to help you reprioritize that? Are you, is it a topic you've never covered before, so you're just kind of procrastinating because you don't know where to start? Have you done all the interviews, but you're not quite sure what the focus is, and you just can't get the words written on a page? Kind of helping somebody figure out okay, we've had some delays, you're not meeting deadlines, what's causing that issue, and digging into that a little bit more. Because I think sometimes we're just like, oh, they missed that deadline, what's going on? But if you ask them some questions, maybe they had something personal with their family, maybe there's something else. Could just be that they missed it, but you never know unless you ask and dig into it.
Very good.
I do. I love this, and it helps provide. As we've brought team members into the podcast, we've tried to take the advice that we've been given to our listeners for the last almost 4 years, and it's so hard to take advice that you give and apply it to your own business. So we really appreciate your perspective. Typically at the end of every episode, we ask the same question to all of our guests, and that's been, what does success look like to you? But we're in a unique opportunity, boys, with having Jessie here, someone who has interviewed hundreds, thousands of different farmers.
Hundreds, probably.
Hundreds?
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite question that you like asking in those interviews?
I mean, there are a lot of good questions out there. I feel like some of the best information you get is when the interview is done. So either asking is there anything else that I forgot to ask? Or it's you shut off the camera, you turn off the mic, and there's just this moment where people kind of maybe they had their guard up a little bit and they relax, and that is where you get a lot of the really good information.
See, this is why we have Farm for Fun.
Yeah.
Because even though you have the video and you're recording,
so we're gonna have you back for Farm for Fun.
Are those the episodes with Bush Light?
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
We've talked about that. It's something that we've learned. It takes time to open up to somebody you've just met. In a lot of the interviews that we do, this is the first time we meet the guest. Time is so valuable, but we've talked about recording a dummy 30-minute podcast before we even actually hit record, and then launch into the conversation with a little more perspective. I mean, we try to do as much preparing beforehand.
Yep.
So we can provide perspective and maybe direct some questions, but it's so hard to do.
So we typically ask, what does success look like to you? Since we're talking with successful farming, what does successful farming look like to you?
It's a good question. I think...
And we'll give you a little time to think here. We'll professionally delay, but
Don't get caught up in our words.
Yeah. But we're at the Commodity Classic here at the John Deere booth, and that's what we're here for. We're Farm for Profit podcast, so we're profitable. Your Successful Farming magazine. We want to tell the story of what successful farmers and farming looks like, and of course, John Deere wants to relate to their customers, and they want to tie in to make them more successful. There. Do you have a thought? And maybe it's what I'm reading is passion, but do you have a thought of what successful farming looks like?
I think it's making sure that at the end of the day, no matter what our content looks like, how you're getting it, like that it's still meaningful, so that a farmer reading an article on marketing learns something new, that a farmer that is getting ready for succession planning learns something that maybe makes their family come out of that stronger versus the alternative, which is what tends to happen, that maybe they learn about a new technology that they're not going to implement on their farm next year, but something they're going to start to think about and put a plan together to implement in a few years. So I think you could talk about the success of the print product, the digital product, all of those things, but I think at the end of the day, making sure that we're still doing our job of helping farmers be successful.
There you go.
I love that. This has been a pleasure of ours to do this interview. Listeners, as you reflect back on what we talked about today, we spent a significant amount of our episode getting to know Jessie a little bit better. And I think that was intentionally done that way. I want your feedback to feel if that's something you want us to do more in the future, because we had a lot of fun. I mean, we have a lot of fun a lot of times.
Yeah.
But this was so much more of a refreshing approach to giving some value added to our listeners. And the value that I pulled out of this is, as you're looking to establish team members for your farm, whether they are third party or they are employees, that communication will always be key. And that communication is what's going to be evolving. And Dave and I have talked about this 3.5 years ago on the podcast. We've had many conversations around, you got to meet those parties where they're at, as to, did they email you? They want an email response. Did they text you? They probably want a text response. Is it better to sit down face to face, find out if they're struggling with wordsmith or whichever it is, to the point of making sure that you communicate with them in a format that they are. But then also, I loved what you added to what we've said in the past, is communicate why. Why the deadline's important. Corey, why do you want the seed by Friday? Well, it's because I have to test what I just retrofit, upgrade my planter. I'm not planting on Saturday, but I want to test on Saturday so we can roll next week Wednesday. Because your dealer may think, there's rain in the forecast.
Yeah.
What the heck's he need? But if you tell the why, we're going to get things a little bit better. Trusting the people that you work with. We've talked a lot, Jessie, about advisory teams and how that plays an important role on the farm. And those usually become your trusted members of this team. But if you can't trust somebody, maybe you need to find somebody else. And the best way to do that is go to your existing advisory team and ask for referrals. And that's something that we really like to do. And then, how do I become a priority for you? It's a question that we can ask. That we can ask vendors, partners, employees. If you've got somebody that is just late every single day, clearly they're not putting your farm as a priority. If you have a salesperson that's always forgetting to put your order in, whichever it ends up being, maybe just a simple question. Probably going to make them squirm.
Yeah.
That's a hard one to answer, because if you are getting asked that, you screwed up. So that's what I pulled, the value that I grabbed out of the show. What do you guys think?
I think that's good. I got 2 or 3 extra questions.
See, and I had an after hours question. I had an after episode
consider
question.
the cameras are off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right now.
We'll make believe.
But I feel like we're in the wild, wild west of marketing, right? With social media. Like, it's not what it was 5 years ago.
Yep. And
influencer marketing.
Yep.
Are you guys getting on board with that? Or, I mean, is that going to be a big part of what's going forward?
We've done some dabbling with influencers, really trying to find what the right fit is for our brand. And we've partnered with influencers. So we partnered with Shark Farmer years ago and have had lots of the influencers write columns for us online and in print. Rob did some segments for us on the TV show. So we've done that sort of partnership. We've done some larger collaborations where it was more of a branded piece. So an advertiser wanted an adjacency with a specific influencer. Mm-hmm. So we've done that on that side. I think when we've talked about what our mission and vision is, right, it's to help farmers be successful, but you can do that in a lot of different ways. What we do really well is storytelling and content. So I think we haven't quite found the right way of how we pair with influencers to do that, but I think there's a lot of potential there in terms of the audiences that influencers
I was just
have.
gonna go there.
And they bring a lot of that perspective and a lot of reality. That is why farmers follow a lot of the ag influencers, because they see what they're doing every day and they can relate to it. So how can we leverage their form of storytelling with our form of storytelling? And I don't have a perfect solution
Yeah.
in mind for it, but I think there's a lot of
And
opportunity there.
your marketing is going to change, I would assume, based on your audience. So I would assume to the question that he asked you, it's going to be dependent on who our audience is at the time. And as that audience grows up, gets older, changes, as society changes the way that audience views content, et cetera, that answer would change, I would think.
And part of the Wild Wild West I was referring to is 2 years ago, last year. Would either of you think that we'd be sitting up here with John Deere? I mean, we don't have a journalism or broadcasting degree by any means.
2
We're
years
unprofessionals.
2 years ago,
We're unprofessional.
the most
to jump-
unprofessionals.
2 years ago, I'm going to be honest and say no.
Yeah.
Last year, this was a goal.
Yeah.
And that's just one of these moments that now we get to set the next goals. I mean, did I ever think that we would have the opportunity to interview the editor-in-chief of Successful Farming? No. I mean, just to be humble, this is I don't know, crowning achievement is that, but you're important. You have great perspective, and the podcast has generated us the ability to have access to those types of professionals. And we've talked about on other shows that it's no longer about us. This is about giving our listeners access to you. You know, they are sitting across the desk from you right now having this conversation. We're just asking the questions.
Yep.
So that's the fun part is I think when our perspective shifted is when our audience really grew.
Yep.
That
Yeah,
it wasn't about the three of us.
We're not the cool people. We interview the cool people.
Absolutely.
But there is a little bit of like your guys' personality and your backgrounds that you bring into it too, and I think your audience appreciates how well-rounded you are coming at farming and agriculture from a few
Three different
aspects.
perspectives
Yeah.
makes a different interview by a long shot. So.
Sometimes it makes the interview cumbersome.
Yeah.
Hopefully not this one.
It takes a while to get to your point.
Hey, look, there's periods of time to where I know we sat for 15 minutes and I didn't say nothing.
Yep.
So we've definitely worked on that the last 4 years.
So what are you going to do? I don't see a wedding ring when you get married, have kids, et cetera, assuming that you don't have any. How's that going to affect your editor-in-chief? Talk about
man.
goal setting and juggling. Cameras
trying
are
to
off.
Are
Cameras
you
are
trying to play
off.
matchmaker here, Dave, or what?
She owns the matchmaking software.
Yeah, okay.
Meredith already owns that.
What a question. I don't have kids. I have a dog. I don't know what that looks like. All of the previous editor-in-chiefs were men. Most of them, when they were moving into the role, they were, at least in my recent experience, they were a little bit later in life, so they had kids, but the kids were a lot older. So to be really honest with you, I have no idea what that looks like, being pregnant and going on maternity leave in this role. And then, there's everything that comes with that. But then once you actually have kids, there's all of the logistics and scheduling and have a kid that's sick and need to run to daycare or to school to pick them up. So to be frank, I have no idea how that will work. I think it will take being flexible and giving myself grace.
Having seen my wife do it and how her focus changed, of course, motherhood, her focus went this direction. So when we talk about goal setting, we talk about visions and passion. You have a passion for the industry now, but it's interesting to think, well, what if your kids change your course of direction and what that looks like and how you stay strong as a goal setter and getting to where you got, how you still keep focused.
It's fascinating the number of guests that we've interviewed that has stated that when they found their match, their spouse, whatever that looked like, how it maybe changed the direction in which they were headed or the way they viewed prioritized things, but ultimately nobody would go back and change it.
They can't ask that to you in an interview and a job, but this is not a job interview. So the big five right now, we're good.
I will say, though, Lisa Faust-Prater on our staff, our family editor, been on the staff for 15, 20 years. Don't quote me on the exact number. So before I started, was full-time for a while, went to part-time after she had kids. And it's really, hadn't read a lot of her work previously, but I think it's changed her perspective and in some ways made her a better editor and made her a better family editor because more of those topics like she relates to and she has more insights and her kids have had cattle that they show. Like, it just gives her a little bit more perspective too.
And
so.
that's what gives our podcast more perspective is finance, farmer, real estate, and entrepreneur. What's the difference in that? We all look at a different perspective. Now you get 3 for 1 in one interview, but just like the mother changed, and then it just changes the way that you think about things. And the more interviews we do, guys, I think the more changed our perspective of how we think to do the next one, et cetera, et cetera.
So you've glazed over. Sorry,
No,
did
go
I
ahead.
jump
Go
on you?
ahead. No, yeah.
What did I glaze over?
Being the first woman in this position.
Oh, I was going to say kids. No, I don't really want kids.
No, I'm giving her the cop out.
Glazed right over that.
She gave us an answer. I'm not going to pry any deeper. But the first woman, and I struggled with how to approach that in this conversation, hence why it's clear at the end and we hadn't really talked about it. National Women's Day yesterday. Okay? Is there a National Men's Day? Just bringing it up for perspective.
There should be.
Conversation. Okay. Just the sheer love how involved agriculture and women in agriculture have gotten and where we've come from. As you take this role on as the first woman, as you take this role on as the first woman in this position, does it change? Do you feel pressure? Is there anything that comes with that? Why people are making it such a big deal?
So I feel a couple of different ways about this. They don't necessarily all line up. There is part of me that's just, I wanted the job regardless of male, female.
Yeah.
I have the skill set for it. I want to do it. So
Absolutely.
part of me, and I like being the interviewer much more than the interviewee. So this was a lot of sharing for me today. But so part of me doesn't like that sort of spotlight that comes with it. But I also recognize that it does mean a lot to a lot of people, and people that when you haven't seen, can be a woman, it can be a person of color, it can be anyone that's maybe not the status quo in a position. It opens up doors for others. So I don't want to take away from that. And I also recognize that there are, people across ag journalism like Sarah Wyant that have had a lot of prominent editorial leadership positions. She started AgriPulse. She also happens to be from my hometown, which is just a fun little small world fact.
Yep.
So also recognizing that it is a big deal and I am excited for it, but a lot of that is possible because of the women who have come before and also my kind of desire to not be as much in the spotlight as well, too. Yeah. So trying to balance all of those things.
Because Corey and I both have 2 daughters. Dave has 2 sons. And it's just interesting when we talk perspective and what you do as a parent to not necessarily influence, but also influence the way you raise these children.
Well, apparently you need to move to her hometown if that's where they're
right. Something in the water there,
That's apparently what decision you need to make there.
Because you want to raise strong women. Dave also wants to raise strong sons.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And provide them the opportunity to go do and be whatever they want to.
Yep.
And if that's become editor-in-chief down the road, awesome.
So how much weight do you feel? Weak in the position, you're like, man, I'm like bench pressing all kinds of weight now.
It's a fair amount. I mean, it's a tremendous opportunity, but there's also a lot of responsibility there to our staff to be a good leader for them. And I know I'm going to make mistakes, but trying to make those quickly and learn fast from them.
That's why the first decision she made was sweet kicks. For you listeners, you can't see the sweet kicks, but her whole team is wearing some really sweet.
That's a reason to go to YouTube.
Don't show Brian those red shoes.
I tell you what.
He wasn't paying attention.
That's
she knew the weight was coming. She said, I need insoles. Got it.
Yeah.
And it's a 120-year-old brand. Like, I don't take that lightly either. Like, I want it to be around for another 120 years. So how can I, for however long I'm at the helm, help set it up well to make sure that happens. So there's a fair amount of weight there, but I'm also trying to give myself it's been a week.
I've got
breathe a little.
It's been a week, but you're young and you're in a position I would think most people retire from.
Yeah.
Correct.
So you got a long. Is this what you're going to retire from, or do you got different goals, or what's next?
So, a couple of thoughts on that. In our February issue, Natalina Sense wrote an article about people staying in leadership positions for a really long time. This happens at like commodity checkoff programs, boards. And sometimes those people need to do that because no one else is stepping up. Sometimes they stay in a position and there's somebody else that really wants to come on and do it. And one of the experts she interviewed said, really like in the first 5 to 10 years, like that's when you're giving the most, right? You have the most energy, the most new ideas. After that, what you're really able to do kind of starts to taper off. So yeah, that puts me, 10 years does not put me at retirement unless I start saving a lot better than I have been. So I had a friend ask, they're like, what would you want to do next? And I was like, I think first I need to focus on being really good at what I'm doing now. So focusing on that is my priority. What comes after that, I have no idea. It's kind of exciting to think that this maybe wouldn't be what I retire out of, but maybe the brand evolves in such a way that it's a different role that I move into, and this position opens up for somebody else to bring new energy
Tanner,
into.
to get that down in about 10 years from now, she's going to be looking for something. We might need a podcast host. You're the editor-in-chief.
I hope we have enough money at that point to be able to pay her.
Put that in the CRM. Looking for
It's
something new.
It's a great question, though. Yeah.
This has been great, and we appreciate you taking more than an hour out of your farm show. We know that you have a lot. Absolutely. We can't thank you enough. We're excited to get this edited up and put out there, but ultimately for our listeners, we want to wish you the best. We know that they are a pool of 20,000 strong that are going to root for you to do well and probably watch what you got going on. So it'll be a lot of fun to watch it grow, watch the brand expand. And I know if you want input from any of them, just ask. And my last question for you is, what can we do as the Farm for Profit crew, not just the three of us, to help you out?
I think, a couple of things. Thanks for having me on, first of all. I said I like being the interviewer more than the interviewee, but you guys have made this really fun, so thank you for that. And I would love feedback. I ended my first column with if you have feedback, reach out to me. I think that's really important for us to hear what our audience needs, but I think the same thing for you guys. So are there topics that you're covering that we're not? Are there guests that you've talked to that would be really helpful for our editorial team to know about? Just that sort of communication back and forth. I think feedback is really important to help move things forward, but also you might talk to a guest that we haven't heard of and they have a really important story to share, or a new technology or something that's going to help other farmers. So passing all of that along, that helps us be better at our jobs.
Yeah. And if people aren't getting successful farming, how can they get that?
You can go to agriculture.com and subscribe.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate this. Listeners, until next time, have a good one.